And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Monday, March 16th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, AI is now a competitive edge in federal capture, and small firms need to adjust fast. Plus, as HHS looks to speed up AI in clinical care, the big questions are burden, trust, and what comes next. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Defense Department has begun taking a series of equity stakes in companies deemed critical to national security. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have questions about the new strategy. And Federal News Network's Anastasia Opus is here with more detail. Anastasia, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Terry.
What exactly is the Pentagon trying to do with these equity stakes?
Yeah, so the Defense Department has been increasingly acquiring equity stakes in defense firms as part of their strategy to strengthen the defense industrial base. We've been talking about it for a very long time. But this is also part of the Trump administration's broader strategy to buy up ownership shares of private companies it considers essential and critical to national security. So, for example, in January, the Defense Department announced a $1 billion equity investment into L3 Harris's missile solutions business, but that's just one deal among many. The government's been growing its portfolio of corporate ownership since last year. For example, the biggest deal is with Intel, when the government acquired approximately a 10% stake in the company, and the government became actually the company's single biggest shareholder. The government also acquired a 5% stake in Lithium Americas, a 10% stake in Trilogy Metals, and that's just to name a few. There are a couple of more. It's not really unprecedented, but actually rare, because the government usually directly intervenes when there is an emergency or there is some type of crisis. So, for example, the 2008 crisis, during the 2008 crisis, the government injected billions of dollars into banking, into auto and insurance sectors just to help stabilize the economy. And now the effort appears to be more proactive than just waiting for a moment of crisis. You know, it's propping up these strategic industries in hopes of lessening the country's reliance on other countries like China. And some officials are pretty hopeful that the equity stakes will be beneficial to taxpayers, but it's actually pretty unclear if that will be the case.
What is the argument for taking an equity stake instead of using traditional grants or contracts to mobilize an industry when you need it?
Yeah, so the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Michael Duffy, spoke to the House Armed Services Committee recently, and he said this is just a tool in a toolbox, but he also referred to equity as a very important tool, unlike grants that he called a sunk cost for taxpayers. And what he said was that this tool gives companies incentives to expand their own production capacity, and at the same time, it also attracts additional private capital. Here's Michael Duffy.
We have all the traditional tools that Congress has allocated with grants, loans, thanks to the Office of Strategic Capital. Equity is another tool that I think we've deployed very effectively, and I think it delivers a few critical kind of additional capabilities. Number one, it creates a partnership with industry, an opportunity to not only for the government to provide capital to lead to the kind of growth that we need, such as in the L3 deal, but it also crowds in additional private capital. Part of that deal was for L3 to put their own billions of dollars against what we saw as a very high demand for growth within the solid rocket motor industrial base. And by making that investment and attracting the additional capital from L3, we were able to create multiples of leverage of that of the government's investment. Secondly, I think by incentivizing or by creating a circumstance where the industry partner puts their own skin in the game, it creates better incentives for them to optimize their production capacity. which I think has been severely lacking in the defense industrial base. We haven't seen the kind of investment that we need in terms of modernizing manufacturing, developing the workforce. We believe in equity investment in some cases, in many cases, in partnership with additional private capital, creates that incentive for better attention to how those dollars are deployed to expand our industry partners' capability.
And so, Anastasia, how have members of Congress responded to that line of reasoning?
So there are, of course, a number of concerns. There are transparency concerns. There is always potential for favoritism that we've been talking about. There's potential for market distortions. And then, as I mentioned, there is a risk that taxpayers could actually lose that money on the investment if that investment fails. It's also unclear whether those investments will really effectively address national security concerns while also delivering those returns for taxpayers. Here's Representative John Garamendi.
The department's making significant equity investments in companies to ramp up their capability to manufacture. Not a new concept. It's been around, I think, forever. How are you monitoring the use of that investment? And ultimately, what will the department be doing with the equity that it has acquired as a result of those investments?
And, those are the types of questions that kept coming up during that hearing. How does the department determine when equity investments are necessary? How do you deal with the possible market distortions? Duffy said that each deal comes with clear milestones on what they expect the industry partner to make their own investment. So he talked about those milestones and when those investments will be made so the department can ensure the investments is stimulating growth. But at the same time, I want to mention that these are just concerns that lawmakers are expressing about, the strategy that this could devolve into arbitrary deals that favor some companies and disadvantage others. But lawmakers overall are pretty supportive of this tool.
So what happens next? What are the next steps for the department?
Lawmakers asked Duffy to provide a detailed report on where the money's going, how the companies are using the investment, and what the department wants to do or what the department plans to do with those ownership stakes. And like I mentioned, this is just something that lawmakers are inquiring because this is pretty rare, kind of new, but at the same time, they're pretty supportive and they think that it makes good strategic sense in a lot of cases. Here's Husk Chairman Mike Rogers.
Fortunately, both Congress and this administration understand the urgency of the moment. Deputy Secretary Feinberg's push to expand munitions capacity and rebuild America's arsenal of freedom is a critical step. Our committee has expanded multi-year authorities for critical munitions in the FY26 NDAA to give industry the predictability it needs to scale production. And the President's call for $1.5 trillion defense budget is one I strongly support. Makes clear we are working to back this effort with real resources. But this is a team sport. Industry must do its part by making significant investments in production capacity. Success also depends on rebuilding fragile supply chains from critical minerals to solid rocket motors. Congress made a multi-billion-dollar investment through the One Big Beautiful Bill to address these choke points, and we expect close coordination on how those funds are used. In that context, I welcome the Department's willingness to explore new financing tools to strengthen supply chain resilience. It's clear the status quo was not working. However, Congress needs clear answers on when equity investments are the right approach.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks for bringing us this story. We'll see how it plays out.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, as HHS looks to speed up AI in clinical care, the big questions are about burden, trust, and what comes next. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. HHS asked clinicians, patients, developers, and health systems how the agency should guide the use of AI in healthcare delivery. That feedback will shape the department's approach to trust, interoperability, and responsible adoption. We'll talk through what happens next with Deputy National Coordinator for Policy at HHS, Mark Atalla. Mr. Atalla, it's nice to have you on the show this morning.
It's great to be here, Terry. Thanks so much for having me.
HHS just closed a major request for information asking the public how it thinks the department can accelerate the adoption and use of AI in clinical care. We've heard a lot about this in lots of different facets. What was the driving force for HHS in opening up this RFI to the public generally?
Thanks again, Terry. I'm happy to jump into the topic of the year and probably the decade, artificial intelligence. So first, we'll start. Last year, the Office of Management and Budget released guidance. And so for the policy nerds listening, OMB Memorandum 2521 on how agencies are empowered to drive AI innovation and seize the opportunity to apply the best of American AI, directing agencies to provide improved services to the public while still maintaining strong safeguards for civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy. And so that's a big ask and a big remit. Overall, OMB's guidance to agencies, including HHS, really was a unified structure for how we should be thinking about applying AI to the work that we do for the public in government. And so I think in that context, thinking about human flourishing, thinking about economic competitiveness and national security, while also still mitigating unlawful discrimination or other parts that just aren't great, and that's consistent with the AI in Government Act, we did two things. And so the first is we looked at, how is AI going to be used across HHS? And so we asked the question of how can we apply AI safely and intentionally to improve how we work and really provide the services that we do to the public. And so in December of last year, we issued the HHS AI strategy, which really was this culmination of these questions and how we wanted to answer those questions. So it was our first initiative for how the department should and can transform itself to make AI available across our federal workforce, integrating across internal operations, research, and the public health functions that we have. Really, this AI strategy fulfilled our commitment to make sure that we were actually being efficient for the public. We were utilizing technologies in ways that we want and ask other people to use those technologies. And so we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about them really in a fulsome way across what we do. And so with an eye towards fostering American innovation, improving patient outcomes, the Secretary's Make America Healthy Again objectives, and I think concretely what that looks like is we rolled out 3 large language models, or LLMs, to our employees and to the teams. We see really great use. We look at that. We want to see what can be improved. We also look across what future technologies we should be thinking about now that people will be excited about over the coming years. And so that's really our first strategy on how are we thinking about AI inside of HHS. Moving to your actual question, which was the driving force behind HHS broadly releasing an RFI focused on clinical use cases and adoption of AI, and then really the kind of voices we hope to hear from as part of releasing the RFI. So in parallel to looking at how we use AI internally at HHS, we really need to understand and want to understand how the area that we focus on, so the health and well-being of Americans, how is that going to be impacted by artificial intelligence? And so, I think you and I both know that, the technology is transformative. So from that world and from that vantage point, we wanted to release this RFI to hear from clinicians, technologists, patients, people, and broadly the general public to seek really concrete experience-based feedback from those that are buying, building, evaluating, using, and then receiving care from these AI tools that are novel, and then those that really want to receive care or use AI but can't. And so those barriers that they're faced with in terms of adoption, in terms of cost, in terms of trying to understand what role these tools will play in their general work. And so from that end, we really want to hear broadly across all of America to understand what we can do to help use AI safely but to its full potential.
A big focus of the way AI is getting deployed in the medical practice field is easing the burden on providers and improving the patient experience. So 2 areas where AI has a lot of potential, but potentially also a lot of risk if the tools aren't designed well. When HHS thinks about this kind of deployment, are there use cases or innovations that you think hold the most promise?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think if you look at the press release that went with our RFI, so we broadly believe AI will be a transformative force for good across America. It can improve patient and caregiver experiences, it can reduce costs, it can improve outcomes, reduce provider burden to what you said. And then I think broadly we think about the general healthcare trend, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Medicaid, and how that will improve affordability. So when we think about both access and affordability, those are key pillars that we've focused on. How can AI unlock benefits across the U.S.? And so I think to that end, we want to make sure that we're mindful that AI adoption is guided by real needs and experiences, which is the reason, in large part to us releasing the RFI. And so when we put out really our comments to say, how can we use AI to impact use cases, we thought about a few use cases that were relevant. So I think the two use cases we thought through first were and we see is first administrative use case. And so that's not the focus of what we thought about, but we do hear a lot from providers of how are they using AI and in their how they deliver care. So whether there's AI scribes where they're ambiently listening to what a conversation between a provider and a patient is, and then dictating that automatically inside of a prescriber's note, or other parts, around scheduling, around administrative functions, around billing and prior authorization. So we hear we're tracking those types of administrative use cases. I think truly how patients will think about and will use AI with their providers is think about a primary health approach. And so if I take it back, so think about a patient with diabetes or high blood pressure, they're over their ideal body weight. It is really hard to make behavior change. I think we've all tried, and we've all to some extent succeeded or wish we succeeded. And so the use of AI to support a person, whether that's directly through recipes, through encouragement, through the really hard work of behavior change, and providers want their patients to engage in that behavior change, but it is incredibly hard to scale the call from the provider, to the person daily when they're at a moment of weakness, et cetera. AI is actually really good at that. And so if I think about that use case of truly a behavior change and what the Secretary's objectives are around making America healthy again, AI, I think, has a ton of promise there. I think beyond that, we also have to think about specific populations. And so from that end, we think about maternal health. We think about where are there patients that are experiencing limitations in their activities of daily living as they age. We have an aging population, and thinking about how we're going to care for them is something that we do think about a ton. And I think with that, those are areas that we hope to see the positive impacts of AI. And then beyond that, the concept of accessibility technology. And so for patients with disabilities, or people with disabilities, the ability of how to help disabilities become a thing of the past through AI and through technology is a fascinating idea that I truly hope we see the innovation in and continue to see people focus on those areas to help actually address the real use cases that people have that they're dealing with on a daily basis.
I'm speaking with Mark Atala. He serves as both the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy and Deputy National Coordinator for Policy at HHS. Mark, let's follow on with those kinds of use cases, because one of the challenges I think that comes up here is that data privacy and patient trust really are essential if you're going to deploy this kind of AI more broadly. How is HHS thinking about the balance between enabling data flows that are necessary to keep all of that back-end information flowing, but also maintaining strict privacy and security for patient trust?
Yeah, it's a great question, Terry. Thanks so much. So we use this phrase called data liquidity. And so if you think about data liquidity from our angle, it's one of our core objectives. And so what it really means for a person is, how can my data as a patient, how does it flow through the system? So how does it go from my provider to me? How does it go from provider to provider? And then thinking about how that then reduces duplication of care. So if my provider knows that I had something done at another provider, whether that's an image, whether it's labs, I don't need to have those same labs done again. And so in that vein, we have something that we refer to, and it's quite an acronym, called TEFCA. And so what TEFCA stands for is the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement. And so what that really is think about it as a network. It's a network of different types of providers that have come together. They're broadly interoperable through TEFCA. And when we say interoperable, it means that we're able to securely exchange and access data across different providers. And so provider A and provider B may be on totally different systems, but how do you make those systems interoperable is really what we focus on here at ASDP-ONC. And so from the TEFCA lens, the ability to scale connectivity nationwide is really through trust, meaning that we built into the CHEFCA network trust to say that provider A and provider B, or the patient that is seen at both places, really have established trust that Marketala is Marketala. And so from that, once you've established trust, it really allows then the automation so that there can be queries between providers and queries for myself to say that I'm only going to get Marketala's data that is my own data. It's not another Marketala that lives somewhere else. And so I think as we built that out and as we've used technology, I think that idea of trust, that idea of privacy and security, it really started from the beginning, and that has been our focus. I think beyond that, we really have tried to say, where can we foster standards and other data sets that in a world of AI, that security is paramount. And so, I think we'll see going forward, electronic health records, whether it's precision medicine, public health, how does that live in the world that we still maintain individual privacy and security without losing the benefits of the technology?
Mark, as we're speaking, the comment window has just closed, and I'm hoping you got hundreds of thousands of responses. I know you haven't had a chance to look at all of them yet. But as HHS goes through this process and considers the responses, what should stakeholders be expecting as you start shaping a more unified HHS response to AI in clinical care?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we definitely will receive a lot of public comments on this, and I'll acknowledge that we may or may not be able to respond individually to each, but we do consider all comments. And so I think what stakeholders will expect is this is a really meaningful RFI. And so when we put out an RFI, and that's a true request for information, is we need stakeholders' input. And so from that input, they should start to expect to see activities at the department and then also at agencies, so CMS, FDA, CDC, that reflect their feedback. And so I think as you see the themes, and all comments are public, as you see these themes emerge, our broader goal of helping improve the health and well-being of all Americans, and that's across all communities, large and small, we're working hard to make sure that changes to regulation, changes to reimbursement, and changes to research and development really do impact patients directly and how they receive care from their providers. And I think we can do that together. And so you should expect to see, broad change over the next years from feedback and as this technology advances.
I've been speaking with Mark Atala. He serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy and the Deputy National Coordinator for Policy at HHS. Mark, I really appreciate you bringing this initiative to us, and we'll look forward to an update.
Thanks so much, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, escalating conflict abroad is now driving debates over war powers, energy prices, and the fate of key funding bills. But first, AI is now a competitive edge in federal capture, and small businesses need to adjust fast. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. AI is reshaping the skills contractors need to compete. Small businesses in particular need to adjust how they use these tools inside their proposals. An intentional approach can help a proposal stand out in a crowd. We get practical guidance from Desmond Brown, former Executive Director of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Brown, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Terry.
We're going to dig into some pretty important topics, but before we do, I want to hear just a little bit about your personal background in the AI and small business contracting space, and then we'll dig into some details.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm the former Executive Director of Small Business for the Department of Veterans Affairs and the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. I have been in this game for 20 plus years in doing federal contracting. I started from the bottom, like ordering paper clips to binding the government in multi-million-dollar contracts. AI is very important to me at this point right now. I often call it the great equalizer. And what I mean by that is that it's going to level the playing field for small businesses to compete fairly now against their large competitors. And I just see this as the future. And I think the ones that do not embrace it are the ones that are going to be left behind.
Well, you just rolled out an AI execution framework that's specifically focused on small businesses in government contracting. Tell us about this framework and what it actually includes.
Correct. So I rolled out this reverse engineering of the RFP. So when you take a look at it, most small businesses are qualified to do the work. But where they make their mistake at, from my years of experience, is that they misread or misinterpret the RFP. So the course or the framework that I've created is basically taking that RFP and dissecting it to what is important to the actual evaluators. Remember, I used to sit on that side of the table. I used to reject a lot of proposals in my 20 plus years. So I know exactly what the evaluators are looking for. I know what is going to stick. And I know exactly what's going to take you from acceptable to being exceptional. And that's exactly what the government wants to award. They want to award a contract, one, that is free of protests. How can we defend this against a protest? And can we bring in an exceptional contractor?
But you're arguing that AI is playing a greater and greater role in that evaluation stage, right? And that's where this new process is supposed to help small businesses?
Correct. So we have to first understand that AI is not magic. Okay. AI is leverage. So it's going to be gold in and gold out. So I think what's happening is that when a small business owner decides to approach and utilize AI, they have to consider it as a co-collaborator, not the sole originator of what your response is going to be. So that's, I think, where the disconnect actually comes. What I've been seeing in proposals that I've seen is that where AI has been used, you can clearly tell that the subject matter expert was really not involved in the process, that AI was just trying to grab information from what it found to respond to the RFP. And that's not going to get you to where you need to get to.
If I understand this correctly, you're saying that this is sort of an AI war, that contracting officers are using AI to screen applicants for different RFPs, and the applicants are using AI to prepare their responses.
So we've been told that the contracting officers are using AI, but we really have no proof of that as of yet. From my understanding was that the government understands the use of AI. However, I do not believe that it's being implemented correctly. So I still believe that there is a competitive advantage that small businesses have. Yes, but small businesses are definitely using AI to help do whatever they need to do, whether it is to help them write the technical proposal or help them create the cost proposal.
So where are you seeing then small businesses make the biggest mistakes if they're using AI to respond to different kinds of bidding opportunities?
Yeah, what's happening is that I believe most small businesses are technically qualified to do what they do. They simply just can't take what's in their head and tangibly put it on paper so they can be successful. So if your thoughts are all over the place, then that's exactly what AI is just going to augment it and amplify it. So, you have to have some sort of skills that you put on paper or whatever prompt you decide to put into AI or the document you upload. It's got to be as top notch as it possibly can be. So you have to give AI something to work with.
I'm speaking with Desmond Brown. He's the former executive director of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Desmond, let's follow this out a little bit, because I know you've said that 2026 is really a turning point for small business. There's a lot happening in the small business contractor space right now, between 8A audits and new kinds of rules and delayed authorizations of different projects. What do you most want small businesses to know as they think about the competitive landscape and then how best to position themselves to be successful?
FY25 was a rough year. And I know the numbers show that the federal government was overall successful. But when you actually speak with small business owners, they really didn't know exactly what was actually happening and how to strategically position themselves. And I suspect that FY26 will be no better. So if you don't have some sort of tool or some sort of strategy in place, you're just not going to get a lot of traction. Or if you're playing by the same rules that you played with 5 years ago, those rules are obsolete. So every year the government reinvents itself and basically how they plan on procuring services and goods. And they're not going to tell you that, but you have to be privy of that information. And what I mean by that is simply this. Terry, this is a relationship-driven business. Okay. And you're only as good as the relationships that you build within the federal government. And this is why, so using AI is only a part of this. You still can't forget the grassroots part of this. And that is, you got to shake hands. You got to meet people. You got to show people that the fact that you're hungry for an opportunity. When I was on that side of the table, I could look in someone's eyes and tell, like, if I don't get this opportunity, my lights may be turned off. And that's exactly the type of person that I want working for me. That's a hungry person that will do almost anything to make sure that job is done and done successfully. So what I'm recommending to small businesses right now is that you can't forget the grassroots parts of it. You have to build relationships. This is the industry that we're in. And without those relationships, you're not going to get very far.
Are you still seeing this administration provide those relationship building opportunities? Are there small business gatherings? Are there more conversations with small business so that folks can build those relationships?
Right. As you remember last year in FY25, a lot of those opportunities or outreach events were cut. I'm not sure exactly what the administration is going to do for FY26. However, but there are some agencies that are still pushing towards it, that still have a budget, that are still actually doing outreach. Because let's just take a look at it. I think that if you're already in the federal government and you already have a contract, you probably will do well. But for new entrants that want to come into the federal government with all these great new ideas that possibly could move the needle forward for the federal government, they're going to have a tougher time building those relationships and getting in because, those events are not around like they used to be.
Well, and many agencies reduced their offices that deal with small and disadvantaged businesses, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
So let's say you're sitting back in your old seat as the executive director. What is the most important way small businesses can leverage AI then to kind of build back this operational and relationship space?
Right. So I think, first of all, you're going to use, once again, I'm going to reiterate that we need to use it as a co-collaborator. So, and I think that on the upside of it, internally, it's going to help you streamline your operation and make you a little more efficient. When you are actually speaking to a government official, you just don't want to say, I use AI. You want to be able to tell them exactly what you've done with AI and the benefits of using AI and what is going to be the benefit to you using AI for that particular agency. We have to keep in mind that when you are approaching a government official, there are a couple things that you have to be cognizant of. And that is the fact that what is that person's pain points? Okay. And the other part of it is that no federal official wants to be on that phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning answering why their system went down. So if you can address those two issues and show how AI can help mitigate those risks, you're going to be a shoo-in. And I think that's the part that small businesses are missing. If they come in wanting to sell, and it's not about selling, it's about how I can be of service. And I have this tool now that can help us move the needle forward for your agency.
Let's flip the perspective then and talk about advice to agencies and their agency contractors and whatever might be left of their small and disadvantaged business offices. How can they use AI to make sure that they don't screen out potentially successful small businesses, that they screen in the right ones, and that they make this whole process maybe more efficient?
Correct. There are a number of different ways to make that happen. I recently did a post on LinkedIn talking about Ostabu 2.0. Are we still relevant? And the possibility of it is that we can still be relevant if we utilize that tool successfully. And what I mean by that is finding more creative, using AI to find more creative ways to do outreach. If there's no budget now, or if your budget's been cut, how can we implement AI to make us a little more creative to do outreach where we have no budget? I think also we need to take a look at this way. We need to find a way of using AI to simplify the pre-acquisition planning as well. So what I mean by that is that Terry, if you take a look at some of the statements of work, they're actually no more than just copy and paste from 5 years ago with a little sprinkle of change on it, and then they call it a new requirement. Well, that's just can't fly anymore because you're only going to get the responses based on how good the RFP is. So what I recommend now is that the OSIBUs work with contracting and the program offices using this tool, using AI to help develop a better and clean package that goes out the door. Therefore, we'll get better responses from industry. So, but the OSIBUs need to be proactive in that.
I've been speaking with Desmond Brown. He's the former executive director of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Really appreciate you coming on this morning. This is going to be an area that we continue to watch.
Thank you for having me, Terry. Greatly appreciate it.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, Escalating conflict abroad is now driving debates over war powers, energy prices, and the fate of key funding bills. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Democrats are signaling they may force votes tied to the Iran conflict while leadership scrambles to keep DHS funding and other priorities on track. Energy interventions meant to blunt price spikes are adding new economic pressure that could reshape the legislative lineup. We'll look at how all of these forces converge on Capitol Hill with Lauren Duggan, Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Lauren, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It was a busy week last week, even though the House was on recess. So let's start there. The Republicans from the House spent most of the week on a policy retreat. They talked a lot. Did they get anything accomplished?
Well, I think they're trying to lay out their plans for this year, which is an election year and always one where you want to be aligned as a party and moving forward. They had the chance to meet with the president, who talked to them a lot about some of his vision for things he'd like to see and kind of come up with some strategy for the rest of the year, in particular probably taking action on another party line, mostly tax and spending bill, which was the dominant bill from last year. I don't think it would be as big as that, but certainly there was a lot of discussion about that our reporters who were on the ground were hearing about.
Now that they've come back, clearly the conflict in the Middle East is going to be top of mind. We've heard about war power votes. We've heard about oversight hearings. We've heard about a potential for a supplemental. What's going to consume their energy?
I think the first is kind of getting back and hopefully hearing from some agency folks. There's been some requests to have more hearings with them. And John Thune, the majority leader, had said that maybe we'll use some of this upcoming budget discussions we're already going to have. A lot of cabinet officials and sub-cabinet officials should be coming in for those in the coming weeks and months. But there will be a push from some Democrats, especially in the Senate, to potentially have votes and force debate around war powers resolutions. We saw some of those right away in the immediate aftermath of the launch of the attacks. But because of the procedures they're trying to tap into, they can force some more votes. And I think we'll probably see that. On the supplemental front, we don't have a request in hand yet from the administration. There's some discussion about that coming maybe later this month, and there'll be a lot of interest in that. And that might take a lot of time off the floor, as they consider what to move on the Iran front and also what to move in addition to that, because that could be an attractive vehicle for other things. For example, some senators were talking about farm aid, possibly hitching a ride. Anytime you're having an appropriations bill, it will be an attractive target for other subjects as well.
Well, this conflict is trickling out into several other spaces. One is DHS and the fact that DHS still doesn't have its permanent funding bill. How are all of the security issues playing to shape that debate now?
Certainly connections are being made rhetorically about that. You know, the longer this is shut down, the harder it is to perhaps look for threats against the homeland or things like that. We've heard some dueling discussions about that. But the underlying issues around DHS seem pretty stuck still, where there was votes on the package that the House had sent over to the Senate. That didn't get anywhere. And there were dueling requests to pass. The Democrats wanted to pass a funding package that would cover everything except ICE and CBP, which are at the heart of that debate. We'll see if there's any progress in the coming week. There was, more discussion about maybe a plan or what to attach to it to deal with the underlying issues around immigration enforcement. But there seems to still be a distance between Democrats and Republicans on what that could look like if it was attached. So the shutdown doesn't seem like it's going to be quickly resolved, but it is certainly an issue that is kind of underneath and underlying a lot of the discussion.
Well, Senator Mullen is due to come up for his confirmation hearing this week. Do you think in the conversation around that he may make some promises that might shake some things loose?
It could, and a change in personnel and leadership at DHS could help move things along. But there are a couple things Democrats do want to see in law, whether it's warrant requirements in terms of going after people with immigration enforcement, or the anti-masking language that they'd like to see in a bill. I don't know if he'll promise that, but we'll see what he says when he's on that stand in front of his colleagues, because he's still a sitting senator who will be before the senators on that Homeland Security Committee asking him questions. But again, change in leadership could be something that helps move that along. We'll have to see.
I'm speaking with Lauren Duggan. He's Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Lauren, one of the other spillover impacts is, of course, the rise in the cost of oil, which is playing out at the gas station, the fuel pump, and really resonating on the affordability issue. There are some proposals in both chambers of Congress that may tackle this. What are you hearing there?
I think they'll first of all start reviewing some of the steps the administration has taken, whether it's around the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and releasing barrels of oil from that, the talk of shipping, making it easier for foreign flag vessels to move things between ports by suspending the Jones Act. Those are two things I think Congress will weigh in on and maybe think about their reaction to that and talking to other officials. So we'll see if anything else legislatively comes together on that front. But, that could be something that comes up in these broader discussions around a supplemental or other debates. But nothing, to my knowledge, right on the agenda, given the things that are going to the floor this week. I'm not sure that they will be immediately tackling those issues.
Well, one of the ways the Republicans have been trying to tackle affordability is housing, and each chamber has its own housing bill. They seem to be pretty far apart on that. What do you think the debate will look like?
Well, we're in that classic stage where the House and Senate pass different versions of the bill, and I'm waiting to see how they try to resolve that. The old way was you form a conference committee and they hash it out in a room. We'll see if they go that approach or talk back and forth, maybe behind the scenes, and work something out there. But there does need to be some conferencing or at least discussion between the two versions because there are some differences. French Hill, the House Financial Services chairman, wanted his own bill. The Senate's bill has been percolating with some changes since last year, was briefly in the NDAA mix, but taken out of that, the defense authorization, which led us to this. So there's a lot of bipartisanship in this issue. There was a big bipartisan vote in the Senate. We'll see if the larger picture will allow them to move forward on some sort of compromise there.
It does seem like some pieces of legislation are moving forward. The Senate passed a SBIR reauthorization, although that's waiting on the House. The president was pretty vocal at the House GOP retreat on the SAVE Act. What do you think is going to be happening with the legislative agenda? Will things actually move forward?
There are some members of the House who have said they're not going to vote to pass a Senate bill until the Senate acts on the Save America Act, as it's now known. So we'll see how that plays out. But senators do have things they want to get done. They have things they have to get done when it comes to if there is a deal on Homeland Security funding. I don't think that will wait and it would move forward. We're going to get to other appropriations. But that Save America Act debate is, I think, in the coming weeks, going to be kind of overshadowing a lot. And this could be a key week as Republicans figure out what their approach is going to be to it.
FISA might also move forward.
FISA is one of those things that has a deadline in April, and because of the 2-week recess that's scheduled coming up, they really need to start laying the groundwork today and have the internal debates. And that's really an interesting one because you have conservative Republicans and civil liberties-oriented Democrats who are on one side against the faction of also Republicans and Democrats on the other, and how they cobble together whatever majority they need to either pass a clean extension or an extension that makes some changes or has a warrant requirement will be a big thing that plays out. And it's not one of those clean things where you can only have to follow one party or the other. You have to see how they're coming together on that. Some strange bedfellows in that debate, to be sure.
Well, speaking of strange bedfellows, let's talk about oversight hearings. There have been a lot of headlines over the last week that seemed that they might motivate some oversight hearings. FBI file security, Pentagon spending scrutiny. Do you think that they're actually going to crank up the oversight hearing process?
They could, and certainly, as I mentioned, with these budget hearings coming up and you have the key officials coming forward, you have the chance to ask them questions. We saw with Kristi Noem, who was there for Judiciary Committee hearings that are part of the normal business. She was asked about some specific contracts that people had scrutiny over. So I think anytime you get in front of either representatives or senators, you're going to have the opportunity to have to face those questions. Democrats, of course, are hoping that they have the gavels of some of these committees next year and will be setting the agenda and having those oversight processes. But where there's some bipartisanship behind questions around Pentagon spending or contracts, you can be sure those will come up in some of these hearings as officials make their way to the Hill.
I've been speaking with Lauren Duggan. He's Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Lauren, certainly no shortage of headlines. Thanks for catching us up.
Thanks for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The General Services Administration is set to lead an acquisition system consolidation across government. That's because GSA will be designated a Quality Service Management Office for acquisition. For more on what that means and what might come next, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me. Justin, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
All right. QSMOs have been around for a while. What's the idea behind designating GSA as the Quality Service Management Office for acquisition?
Yeah, this is all about consolidating the really disparate acquisition systems that exist across the federal government. And no surprise to anyone who's been watching the Trump administration's move in that arena and acquisition in general. They want to really centralize and bring together a lot of these different things to make it more efficient and make things easier on contractors and of course save money and so on and so forth. Eric Uland, the Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget, acting Deputy Director there, broke this news during a conference organized by the Shared Services Leadership Coalition in Washington a little earlier this month.
How do we take nearly 230 acquisition systems across the federal government and bring those down to a reputable and easy to access number to simplify what's important and necessary for the federal government when it comes to acquisition, but what's easy to use, easy to understand, easy to execute with, rather than so many businesses, so many enterprises having to custom fit what they need to do in order to raise their hand and offer goods or services through the acquisition process in the federal government.
Justin, will this designation apply in support of only the civilian agencies, or will it also impact DOD?
Yeah, it's interesting. They're starting with civilian agencies, and so this will impact only civilian agencies. Uland did say that they are going to bring this to the Defense Department. They anticipate tearing into that as well, as he put it. Of course, DOD spending is at least half of what the federal government spends every year. So the whole acquisition system of systems over there is a whole other kind of tangle of things to tear into. It remains to be seen whether there will be, a GSA team that goes over there or DOD tries to mirror what GSA is doing. But fair to say they're aware of it. But if you listen to that number that Uland referenced, the 230 or so acquisition systems that exist across the federal government, that is just on the civilian side. So that doesn't include DOD.
There are 4 other QSMOs. How have they played out so far?
Yeah, it's been interesting. The Trump administration created the concept back in 2019. Of course, these QSMOs, for folks who aren't aware, are essentially a single agency designated to lead kind of a central marketplace organized around distinct mission support functions that all agencies really kind of rely on. You have the cybersecurity QSMO is the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Health and Human Services leads the grants management QSMO. Treasury oversees core financial management services. And then the Office of Personnel Management, unsurprisingly, serves as the Human Resources QSMO. These things have all had fits and starts. Uland charged that the Biden administration kind of just let these things wither over the last 4 years, but they did make some progress and further consolidating things if you look at some of the GAO reports. But by and large, they haven't consolidated everything within their remit or anywhere close to that. And so it's still very much a work in progress. At this Shared Services Conference earlier this month, Andrea Sampanis, the director of the Grants QSMO at HHS, spoke a little bit about her perspective from leading that effort.
I've been to similar events and I've heard a reference when they talk about shared services, they say it's not a sprint, it's a relay race. And across the administrations, we see the baton being passed. I do still believe that is true. I think we are being asked to run much faster maybe than we have in the past. I think we've made great progress. Since the Grants QSMO was designated in 2021, we have really sped up the adoption of our federal providers. Currently with ERA and Grant Solutions, we have about half of grant transactions going through those 2 systems. Yet there's a lot of work left to be done. We have a lot of custom systems. We still got to keep pushing to consolidate, working with the agencies to do that.
Justin, with Andrea's quote there that this is maybe more of a sprint now, but it's been a longer race. What is this new designation for acquisition QSMO? How does that line up with what GSA has been doing so far under the Trump administration?
Yeah, GSA has been at the center of acquisition for the Trump administration, which makes sense. Of course, it's the agency that's tasked with providing government-wide contracting vehicles and services. But really, in a lot of ways, they've tried to put GSA in the driver's seat of shared services. For instance, the agency has been negotiating government-wide contracts with technology and artificial intelligence vendors and other types of vendors under its OneGov initiative. In September of last year, GSA launched an Office of Centralized Acquisition Services for things like IT services, office management, and medical supplies. And GSA is also leading the rewrite of the federal acquisition regulation, the Revolutionary FAR overhaul, as it's called. And so GSA is already kind of overseeing a centralization and consolidation of acquisition processes and policies across government, and this QSMO designation could really ramp that up in a lot of different ways and make GSA more of that central node.
Anytime there's an announcement like this, there's always true believers, and there might be some folks with questions. For the folks with questions, what are they thinking and what are they worried about?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about this. We reached out to GSA to get more information about what this designation means, the next steps and things like that. We haven't heard back yet. We haven't seen the memo or anything designating it. So all we have is kind of what Eric Euland referenced at this conference so far. I've seen some questions about, will this impact any of the big agency procurement programs that exist out there? Or does it just expand GSA's existing supply schedules? Again, those are great questions. We don't really know quite yet. Last year, our colleague Jason Miller reported that GSA was in negotiations to take over the NASA SOUP contract, also in discussions to take over the big NIH IT acquisition and assessment NITAC contract vehicles that the GWACs that they run. So those discussions have been happening prior to this designation. Will this accelerate them or affect them, and where do they stand? All questions we have that we'll be tracking more of as this plays out.
Always plenty of things to watch here in acquisition reform. That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here, Terry.
You can find the full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.